got those M&Ms. So up next is the first person I ever met in the world of Bitcoin. He never remembers meeting me, but great guy nonetheless. We actually announced the launch of my nonprofit, the College Cryptocurrency Network, at the University of Michigan when he was there to speak. And then it was just 3 chapters. Now we have over 170 on every habitable continent. But I get to see Jeffrey Tucker every once in a while, and it's always a pleasure because he's one of the most entertaining people you will ever meet. So it's my pleasure to introduce him now.
Thank you so much. Oh, it's working. It's amazing. Last time I remember anybody using one of these things was Madonna back in the 80s. I sort of feel like. So first, before I begin, I want to thank the Foundation for Economic Education for bringing me here. This is an old organization that was founded 70 years ago. And, nonprofits can get stodgy over time and entrenched in their ways. And I'm very pleased at Foundation for Economic Education because they stepped out into the Bitcoin space in March of 2013 and ran an article by me on Bitcoin, outraging many of their donors and shocking many of their readers. And it was followed by a pile of emails saying, I can't believe you've bought into this crazy magic internet money Ponzi scheme, and so on. And but they took a risk, and they've been out there in front, and they've started accepting Bitcoin donations, so which is just great. So if you're inclined to, you should try to support FEE. It's an organization that is trying to stay on top of technology, which is as I say, very unusual. And as far as I know, it's the only economics think tank in the country certainly of its established, sort of influence that's actually embraced Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, which is just amazing to me. I'm thrilled by it. Second thing to mention to you is that I'm the Chief Liberty Officer of Liberty.me, which is a social network and publishing space, very much focused on Bitcoin and other P2P technologies. I feel sure that almost everybody in this room would benefit from joining. It's $5 a month, and it's a commercial enterprise, not a nonprofit. So I invite you to have a look at that. So what I'd like to do in these few minutes that we have together is just kind of, what I'd like to do is discuss what we've learned over the last 5 years. Probably I will say nothing that you hadn't heard already or that you don't know, but I do think it's important to kind of review some basic facts that we've learned about money and banking in the course of this amazing experiment that's gone on right before our eyes, as we've been so blessed to be part of. This generation gets to see the invention of a new currency that's potentially a global currency unit that can eventually supplant national currencies. It's an amazing thing to be part of and to see happening. And I understand that there's a great deal of incredulity about Bitcoin. Just before I came on stage, I got an email from a very famous economist who's in charge of scheduling speakers for a big conference this July of about 3,000 people discussing political economy, and I was going to head a Bitcoin panel with several other people involved in the space. And he wrote me a note, and he said, the headline was Bitcoin bites the dust, right? That's the subject. So you know what's coming. And so then he adds a screenshot of the current price of Bitcoin, just to underscore the point, He says, look, the thing is dying, $207. This is absurd. Don't you think we should cancel this panel immediately? I mean, do you really want to be part of this? So, right, exasperation, annoyance, it's frustrating for me. I have to compose a message back to him reminding him that when the Bitcoin was $30, he had sent me another message attacking Bitcoin as an obvious case of a bubble that was, destined to fail, So this is what always happens, right? The price goes up, it's a ridiculous bubble. The price goes down, it's proof that it's dying. So you can't win, either way. It doesn't matter what the price is. The people who don't believe just won't believe. And it just so happens this guy is an old-fashioned gold bug, all right? So I try to be tolerant and patient with people who don't get uh, what Bitcoin is and the reasons for its valuation. But it gets frustrating because, I've written, by now, probably 300 articles on the topic, and the skeptics never read them, right? They just keep making the same stupid points again and again and again. It has no intrinsic value. This thing is not backed by states and nations. Therefore, it can't have any value. Surely this thing is destined to fail. It's a Ponzi scheme, and so on. So it gets very frustrating dealing with these people. And yet, we all need to understand that this position on Bitcoin is by far the dominant position in the economics profession. I mean, people just do not understand it. If you go to the latest journals of economics and look up in the money banking journals, anything, you will find nothing on the topic of cryptocurrency. The lessons have not sunk in. People haven't even begun to deal with it at all. Most academic economists are completely and utterly clueless and deliberately blind about this topic. And it's going to be many years before they wrap their brains around it. In fact, they may never. It's going to take another young generation of economists. It amuses me very much to look at the economics profession because the only good papers on the topic of cryptocurrency are all published as private working papers, actually. None of the established journals are even running articles about the topic at all. So we're still at the very early stages of what's really going to amount to an intellectual revolution. We're going to have to rethink our dominant theories of money. I mean, I say this as somebody who had to rethink money completely from the time I discovered Bitcoin, because I didn't believe that it could possibly exist. I had done my undergraduate thesis on the topic of the gold standard. I thought I knew everything there was to know. And one thing I knew for certain in 2011 and 2012 was that you can't invent a new currency out of computer code and release it on a free internet forum and have it obtain value and become a global currency. That much I knew for sure. And every article that was submitted to me as an editor of an economics website on this crazy thing called Bitcoin, I dismissed immediately as proof that the author was gravely ignorant about the truth about how currencies come to be. So I'm embarrassed about that now, but I think what it shows us is that we have to have a little bit of intellectual humility. You think you know how the world works. You think you understand everything there is to know about a subject, and then you turn around and you bump into an amazing surprise. And most of these surprises are being presented to us in the digital age because our knowledge is being crowdsourced, and everybody, all of humanity, can contribute to it. We like to think of Satoshi Nakamoto as an Einstein, just like a single genius. It's actually not true. There were 20 years of scholarship and attempts to do what he did before he did it. It just shocked the world because nobody had known about this before it came into being, because he solved that last final problem, namely the problem of getting rid of double spending. And then just overnight, it was just beautiful. I discovered the thing in 2013, in February, I think it was, and a full month went by where I was just trying to wrap my brain around the thing. I still hadn't solved all the problems, and in fact, it took me a full year to fully figure out why it is that Bitcoin had value at all. I knew for sure that it was a commodified information package that was portable, peer-to-peer, that it was an open source program, that it lived on a distributed network, therefore not being able to be killed by any nation state, no matter how hard they tried. I knew a number of things about it, but I ultimately never really understood the source of its value. And I don't know how many of you in this room are familiar with an economist, Ludwig von Mises. He wrote a book in 1912. Yeah, The Theory of Money and Credit, right? And he proposed this thing called the regression theorem. And the theorem states that something cannot become money unless it first is used as a commodity in barter exchange. And out of barter exchange, one good becomes ever more popular, and you acquire it not to consume it, but rather as a speculative venture to own it in hopes that it can be traded at a later date for the thing you want to consume. That's what money is. A good you get not because you have any desire for that good itself, but because of the hope that you can trade it for something you do want. So you gradually, through money, get out of barter. But in order for this whole process to take place, says Mises, the thing has to have a pre-existing use value, or else it doesn't become money. Now, how does this apply in the world of Bitcoin? I mean, how does this actually work? What is the pre-existing use value of Bitcoin before Bitcoin obtains its first price? That's an interesting question. For my part, what did it for me was looking back to the transaction records from the first Genesis block all the way to the first posted price of Bitcoin, and about 10 months went by during this period of time, where Bitcoin, as far as we know, had absolutely zero value, at least there wasn't a posted price of it. And suddenly October, I think it was, 5th, something like that, in 2009, we get the first posted price. So what happened between January and October? The system was being tested, namely the blockchain was being tested as a tool for transporting commodified, non-forgeable, non-reproducible information packages on a geographically non-contiguous basis to see if it was really true that this great limitation that has afflicted mankind since the beginning of time had now, for the first time, been overcome once the network had been tested and hammered and used about 100 times on average per day over those 10 months. Then we saw the monetary unit that was attached to the blockchain itself suddenly began to obtain a value, which was, I think, the first posted price was something like a 15th of a penny or something like that, right? And some of you were around back in those days. You remember this, right? I was talking to Eric Voorhees the other day, or yesterday. I asked him when he got interested in the thing, and did he remember when Bitcoin obtained dollar parity? And he did remember this. And many early Bitcoiners, once Bitcoin became equal in value to the dollar, thought, well, it's never going to exceed that. I better sell everything immediately. And apparently this is a very common experience. It's very interesting, which makes me laugh now that it's $207. I'm getting messages on my email saying, doesn't it look like Bitcoin has bit the dust? You know, shouldn't we cancel your program? You know? Everything's relative, right? It's very funny. Anyway, so that's the first lesson I think we need to gain out of our experience in the last 5 years, is just a very simple point that cryptocurrency is actually possible, that a market-based digital currency can exist. There has been some speculations in the past by two of my great heroes. F.A. Hayek in 1974 speculated that this could happen in his great book, The Denationalization of Money. He had just won the Nobel Prize. And when you get the Nobel Prize, you can write on whatever the hell you want to, and nobody's going to question you. So he decided to go out on a limb and write The Denationalization of Money, where he speculated about the invention of a private currency. I remember when I first read that monograph, probably 15 years ago. I thought, this is crazy. He had definitely lost his mind, because this can't happen. And then sure enough, 2009, we began to see this dream achieved. Another economist who actually forecasted this was, of all people, Milton Friedman, who had a very nice piece about the possibility of private currency. So now we know. I mean, we know, it's not widely accepted or widely understood yet, but we do know, as a matter of fact, that there can be such a thing as a market-based currency. The currency does not necessarily come from the state. It can emerge out of market experience. That's an amazing fact. More amazing to me than anything else about Bitcoin in particular is that it holds out the possibility of reforming the entire money and banking system from the bottom up rather than a top-down reform. which for 100 years, all economists believed that if we're ever going to have monetary reform, it had to come from a top-down system. We had to get all the most powerful and smart people together, like they did at Bretton Woods in 1944, and impose a system on the world. It turns out that's not necessary. And some of the greatest economists, who ever lived always believed it was necessary. It turns out we don't have to do that. We can gradually supplant the existing system with a system that's grown out of the market itself. This reality represents, just so you understand how radical this is, it really represents an overturning of knowledge that's at least, conventional wisdom that's at least 100 years old with the state theory of money, and it might be as old as 500 years. It's always been presumed that money could never have value unless it was blessed and codified and created and managed by some sort of big public authority. When Bitcoin comes along, it overturns that entire presumption of hundreds of years of monetary theory. It's shifted on its head. Amazing. It's going to take probably a generation before people come around to understanding that. So that's my number 1 point. I have 5 points. The second point is something that's actually amazing about Bitcoin. It's taught us that money is not just some weird abstraction that it floats around to be managed by public authority. Nobody knows how much there is. Like the Federal Reserve, nobody at the Fed has any clue how many dollars there are, really. It depends on how you count them, right? They're continually coming up with new definitions of the dollar. You can't distinguish between money and money substitutes. This has been going on since about the early 1930s. Ever since FDR sort of collected all the gold and said, you're no longer allowed to use gold as your currency. You have to now use these money substitutes. We used to be able to distinguish between what was money and what was a money substitute, what was gold and what was representative of gold. Now, and especially since Richard Nixon finally took away the last vestiges of the gold standard, all money is basically a money substitute. What is it a substitute for? Whatever the substitute for doesn't even exist as part of our money supply. Even today, there's a widespread assumption all over the world, with the public, that somehow gold backs the money system. That there's a big vault somewhere. I don't know how many of you saw the movie called Penguins of Madagascar. Okay, so nobody else likes animated children's classics. Okay. But it's very funny. The whole movie begins with the penguins have decided to break into Fort Knox. Okay, and so they break in and they open the vaults, and there's all the gold that's presumably backs all the money supply. But they're penguins, so they're very smart. They march right past the gold and go to the candy machine in the very back to get to break in and get all the Cheetos out of the candy machine, which have been banned, by public authority because they're unhealthy. So they raid the machine. So the Cheetos are more valuable than the gold. But anyway, so no, gold has no relationship to the modern monetary systems whatsoever. So what we've learned, what we've had to relearn, point 2, is that money is really property. That it's just like any other good you can actually own. So when you own your Bitcoin, they're really yours. When you port them around, they're real goods that you can move peer to peer from one person to another. Not a money substitute, but the money itself. George Selgin, the economist, one of the smartest living economists to my mind, likes to call it synthetic money. Okay, that's a fine term. But I think a better term for it is just money. That's what it is. It doesn't mean it's universal money, but it's money for particular purposes and for particular people under particular trading arrangements. It's a stage of evolution of money. It's not a global currency yet, but we're headed in that direction. Money is property. It's not something managed by a central bank. It doesn't need to be manipulated by the Treasury Department or by elite intellectuals or codified by politicians or anybody else. It can just be a property like anything else. And let's not forget that money can be created under all kinds of conditions, and in fact is being created under all kinds of conditions right now. A few years ago in Baltimore County, there was a great shortage of $100 bills. And so the drug dealers had no real currency to use to exchange with each other. So what happened was that the Walgreens and CVS stores were reporting a tremendous increase in the amount of theft of Tide laundry detergent. And they couldn't understand what the deal was. Why does everybody want Tide laundry detergent? It turned out that the drug dealers had basically monetized these bottles of Tide laundry detergent. They had become the currency, you know. Another example I always like to use is on Halloween. If you've ever played a trading game with kids, after they've collected all their candy and you set them in a room and encourage them to trade with each other, give them like 30 minutes to do this. I guarantee you it'll take about 10 minutes or so, but there will be an invention of money. Somebody will invent money. In other words, they'll stop just bartering with each other, and one very smart kid among them will learn that, say, for example, Jolly Rancher candies are the most valued candy of all. Even though he doesn't personally like them, he's going to acquire them in order to trade them in for other goods. And so that Jolly Rancher candy will obtain a monetary value, a premium over all other candies. And then once the clock runs out, it'll be demonetized and go back to being just a regular candy for consumption purposes. It could be Snickers, it could be Butterfinger, it could be whatever. But money will be invented on the spot. So we're inventing monies all the time right now. Another case I want to mention to you, a friend of mine, isn't it strange we're in the Bitcoin space? You know a lot of people who've been in and out of jail. Have you noticed this? You have to, in order to have real credibility in this crowd, you have to say, yeah, I spent 8 months there. It was no problem. So a friend of mine spent 4 months in jail. And I said, what was the currency in jail? He says, oh, that's an easy one. Everybody knows. It was ramen noodles. That's what they traded. They didn't have access to dollars. They didn't have cigarettes. So they all traded ramen noodles. That was the money. Amazing. So anyway, what we've learned from Bitcoin is that money is really property and that there's a strict distinction between money and money substitutes, which gets us to point 3. And this is a regular controversial claim, and I do want to mention it because I'm still thinking through it a little bit, and I've been reluctant to mention this at any public talk because I do think it's interesting. Within banking circles for like the last 500 years or so, there's been a great debate about fractional reserves, whether a bank should be required to hold full reserves or whether a warehousing bank can speculate with the money of its depositors on various loans, investments, and that sort of thing, as long as they're able to maintain a liquidity based on the probability that depositors will exchange their money substitutes for the real money that they have warehoused. And whether or not those probabilities amount, if the bank's operating on those probabilities, if that amounts to fraud or just kind of a good deal for consumers. And I've never really had a super strong opinion about this fractional reserve versus full reserve debate. I mean, ultimately what happened, and this happened about 500 years ago, and there's a really great book on this by Jesus Huerta de Soto called Money, Business Cycles and Banking, something like that, right? But there was a series of court decisions on the continent that basically declared that money substitutes that were signifying certain reserves at a warehousing bank were not really the property of the depositors. They were only the property of the depositors given certain contingent situations. And so that the banks could hold a fraction of reserves. So I was been very interested for the last couple of years to see how similar services in the Bitcoin world were going to pan themselves out. Would we begin to see the development of fractional reserve banks, or would the services that are holding your Bitcoin for you and making it possible for you to have more efficient trades or whatever, many money exchange services and so on, whether they would be holding full reserves. And I think after the failure of Mt. Gox, we're beginning to get an answer to this question. And the answer is that full reserves are very much preferred by Bitcoin customers. If you hear that some service you're using is not holding the actual Bitcoin that's in your wallet and does not give you unlimited access to them, on an instantaneous, full liquidity basis, what you've got is essentially a problem. I don't know how many of you know the website that I like very much called badbitcoin.com, or maybe it's .org. Is it .com or .org? Does anybody know? This is a website that has a list of about 1,000 Bitcoin scams. They're really fun to look through. They're all one version or another of the same thing. You turn in your Bitcoin over to some company. They promise to invest it well. Maybe it's on a mining project. Maybe it's on some futures market. Something else. They're going to hedge the markets, and they're going to give you a greater return than you expect on just to hold your Bitcoin yourself. And of course, what happens is that they steal your Bitcoin, basically, right? And that's what goes on at these. But as I read through some of the promotion of various of these companies, of these scams, it's like, okay, so I give you my Bitcoin, you take it, you give me access to it based on, certain rules, whatever. There's a little bit of risk involved, but you're going to get a greater return. As I began to read through these things, I began to realize, these scams read pretty much like modern banking, actually. This is the way banks work. But but if you do it in the Bitcoin space, you're a scammer, right? And you get in trouble. If you do it with dollars, then you get bailed out, basically, and you get to run the government. Okay. So anyway, I think the conclusion we can see after our limited experience of Bitcoin is that we're tending towards a 100% reserve system. I'm going to write this up in a paper. Okay, I've got 2 more points and only just a couple more minutes. The fourth point is that innovation is not frictionless. And I think we're having a hard time really dealing with this. People are very strange. They expect Bitcoin to have entered into the world as a perfect system with perfectly operating interfaces where everything works just like Gmail does, or any other, or like your smartphone with an app. You press the button, you see the weather or whatever. They expect everything to have rolled out beautifully, and for there not to be any problems at all. I mean, this is not the way innovation takes place. You look at any of the great innovations in history, whether it's internal combustion or railroads or light or flight or anything else, the history of the development of those innovations is always full of friction, sometimes disasters, very frequently massive amounts of scamming, because anything that's really exciting attracts that sort of evil cousin of genuine entrepreneurs, racketeers, essentially. And so that's why we have so many of them in the Bitcoin space. I mean, folks, we need to look at this as a complement to our industry. If we were an industry without scammers and racketeers and people trying to steal Bitcoins, I would be really worried. If it were a perfectly clean world of angels, it would be terribly boring, and I would have very few hopes for the future for this industry. It's the very fact that we attract so many of these people is a compliment to our industry. But we're going to have to get used to the fact that innovation is not frictionless. And also, friends, this is the most serious problem that we face right now with government regulations coming in, presuming to codify the way the Bitcoin network should work. This is all regulations assume that all innovation is done and complete. This is ridiculous. This is the worst possible time for regulation. Nobody really knows for sure what the Bitcoin markets are going to look like in 5 years. Regulators coming in right now and doing evil things like know your customer laws and all the rest of the nonsense they're trying to impose on us and have actually very successfully, presumes that Bitcoin is finished developing. And now we can lock it down and secure it and tighten it and make it static. We cannot do that. We're just at the very beginning. In fact, I don't know if you would agree with me on this, and nobody knows for sure, but I suspect that the regime uncertainty that we've been afflicted with over the last 12 months with these unrelenting threats from the state against Bitcoin accounts for a lot of the weakness of the dollar Bitcoin exchange rate over the last 12 months. I can't prove that, but I'm very suspicious. Okay, a final point I just want to make, I think that we've learned over the last 5 years, is something actually incredible that we've heard in the last talk. We have accepted now, for the better tree, the idea that our money and banking services are going to divide the world between the haves and the have-nots. And we're just going to go ahead with that theory. There's some people that have access and some people that don't. And those of us that have access, you know, hey, we're privileged and that's great. That's wonderful. We get what we want. And those without access, well, to heck with them. There's nothing we can really do about that, essentially. I mean, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been working for the last 10 years on the problem of financial exclusion. And we do have a lot of micro banking experiences in the world, but up until Bitcoin, nobody really had a solution for dealing with the problem of the unbanked in the world, or people who have talents and goods and services they desperately want to offer to the world and become part of the global division of labor and to actually add value to the great project of building civilization. And up until cryptocurrency, nobody had really come up with a viable way for inclusion. And to me, somebody asked me in an interview earlier today, what is the thing that excites you the most? What excites me the most about the possibility of cryptocurrency is the inclusion of an additional, probably as many as 5 billion really talented people into the global project of building prosperity. I think it's going to be amazing and unbelievable. And the best thing about it is it's not going to be accomplished by some legislation being passed by Congress or some great humanitarian effort on the part of the Ford Foundation or whatever. It's happening because a few cyberpunks got together about 5 years ago and managed to create a great new technology that's gradually going to take over the world. I believe that this is the great achievement that cryptocurrency is going to bring about, namely the liberation of humanity. Thank you very much.